there 6 principles?
Seven, seven,
Seven.
seven.
Okay,
Yeah.
I wrote down
Yeah.
eight, but I guess the first one.
That's all right.
Yeah, yeah. But I was just kind of yeah, I think it'd be cool to just hear your perspective on like what I was saying, and then based on even what I've heard you sharing too, like how does kind of I think it's easy when people get stuck in like depression and anxiety.
Mm,
Possibly you can over identify with those things, those symptoms. I know I've kind of
mm,
struggled with that. It's like, well, who am I? It's like saying
mm.
I have bipolar, not I am bipolar.
Yep.
And then sometimes you have to identify with it to get help, right? Because there's kind of these extremes where you might not say anything and then that's lonely. But it seems like you have some really good like wisdom on these, things, how to live life, but also like my thought was more just like how do those things apply to
Hmm.
someone who struggles a lot? Can they still, I guess,
Yeah.
live like a life that is, awesome? And I think a lot of people think they can't do that, you know.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what I was thinking
Sure.
about. Yeah.
Now, I mean, we're on now, right? We're
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think that people have real struggles when it comes to mental health issues. We encounter times when we maybe lose faith in ourselves and we begin to question God and what our purpose is. But I'm a big believer in recognizing that every morning when we wake up, God is saying, I love you. I believe in you.
Right.
There's something that you can accomplish unlike any other human being in the universe, and that we have value. And I think that that message is one that we sometimes forget. God sometimes has more belief in us than we have belief in ourselves. And when we recognize that, we're able to celebrate small victories, feel a sense of gratitude that, yeah, I have challenges, no question. We all have challenges, but God's not asking me to be perfect. God is saying just to take a little bit of my light to make the world a little bit better, to try to infuse something eternal in time, which is very fleeting. And I think, when people act in a way, and this is just a piece, I think
Hmm.
their emotions are lifted. Sometimes we think I have to feel right to be able to do right.
Yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
do, and then we feel. It's something.
Right.
So just
Yeah,
do
yeah.
something kind, and that
Hmm.
definitely impacts us.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean for you is this did you I guess just out of curiosity because like I've grown up with my faith my whole life, so I don't really have a lot of like, well, before God I was doing this. It was like I was 5 years
Right.
old. But I mean for you, has this just been your way of thinking for a long time? And obviously, as years go on, right, we gain wisdom hopefully, and we get perspective on things. But like, have you just been at this for a long time?
I mean, I would say, look, we're all
Yeah.
works in progress. I mean,
Right,
I
right.
think I'm generally wired to be more like optimistic, positive. Both of my parents are people of great. My father would always say he should live and be well. You're here for a purpose. Remember who you are. My
Right.
mother was somebody who, no matter how life was chaotic, I'm the oldest of six, and we had challenges. She was always, you'd ask her how she was doing. She'd say, "Thank God, fantastic." She was just a very upbeat person.
Yeah.
All that
Yeah.
being said,
Right.
I've had experiences in my life that motivated me to go much deeper. I mean, my mom passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm when she was 44 years old.
Hmm.
I was 21 at the time. My
Wow.
youngest sibling was 8 years old. And my entire life was turned upside down. And I realized that life can change in an instant. And then the main, I would say, catalyst for me was when I got to the same age as my mom. That was very traumatic. My mom died at 44. And then when I got to that age, I asked myself the question, am I doing the most that I can with the life that God has given me? And it
Hmm.
led me on this journey of really trying to think through and hopefully inspire others how not to live life from crisis to crisis. As a rabbi, I see this.
Hmm.
Somebody's in the hospital and they say, "Rabbi, pray for me," and then I don't hear from them again. It's not because they died, God forbid, but they're healthy. And when life just moves along, we kind of take life for granted. But I realized
Right.
that there's so many missed opportunities when we treat life as a highlight film. And rather than lead life from crisis to crisis,
Yeah.
if we can help navigate life in a way where I realize that every day I'm called for transcendence. Every day I'm called to make a difference in the world. Every day there's something unique that I can accomplish different than yesterday and tomorrow, then our lives will just be so much richer. So that led me to write this book, which is really about helping people identify what is the best version of yourself, the life you want to lead. You know,
Mhm.
the premise I talk about is it's called What Will They Say About You When You're Gone? Creating
Right.
a Life of Legacy. Premise being you're at a funeral, and as you walk out of the funeral, you have a moment where you say to yourself, I hope they speak about me the way they spoke about an individual, and you're motivated for about 15 minutes until you go back to life as usual. So in the book, I help people identify what's the best version of yourself, and then I take them on a journey of 7 principles to reverse engineer our lives so we lead the lives now for how we want to be remembered.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that you just said crisis to crisis because yeah, I think people struggling with these symptoms or these diagnoses, usually it's not until maybe it's similar to like rock bottom and substance abuse, right?
Yep,
Like
yep.
you don't usually, or like you're saying the example of your health, like you don't usually, but I think what happens is people do go through some kind of mental health crisis, and then I think they get through it, but they might not get to maybe the root or the cause of like what's
Yep.
bothering them, right? Which obviously that's a complicated conversation because I think the faith element is like, gets into like God healing and doing these things. And so I think a lot of people can just be kind of beat down by like hopelessness, maybe by the way that they've coped with their thing. And it sounds like you're saying, I don't know, does that make sense? Like, how do you kind of like what gives you hope? Or I don't know, do you have the personal
So
experiences of these
look, I mean, I think that
challenges? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, look, I mean, there have been moments. I mean, I guess I've developed myself over time, but again, when my mom passed away, and you
Right,
feel like you feel
right.
such despair, and I would say that as a rabbi, I encounter a lot of people that are in that place, particularly when they get a diagnosis or they they lose a loved one. But I have also seen that. Um, and this is something that is a great way of looking at life. Viktor Frankl, I don't know if you've read him in Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah, I think I listened to it a while
Yeah,
ago. Yeah,
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 so he
yeah.
talks there, and I think this, which is, you know, we still have, no matter what is going on in life, the free choice to choose how we deal with what happens to us.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
that is something that really enables us not to um, change the situation, but how do we see the situation? It's not what happens to us, but what happens through us in these moments of crisis that we
Right.
ultimately can emerge stronger and more empathetic to other cases that people are going through. And all of us have had tremendous sometimes disappointments, but
Right.
somebody once said a rejection is a way of God giving you a new direction to
Hmm.
try to find, a new path in your life. And no obstacle is just a wall. It's a door where God is saying
Hmm.
there's new opportunities for you here. And I think that one of the ways to help people develop that resilience is to look back on their own life and think about where were they able to change, their perspective on things. And, where sometimes I've had where in that moment I say, how in the world is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And then years
Right.
later, I look back and say, thank God that happened to me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
be where I am today if not
Right.
for that. So going through that, talking to other people who've been through it, it's a way to fortify your muscles spiritually to be able to not get stuck, but rather to soar, even amidst sometimes the winds that we face.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my mom says, well, fresh off of, seeing her yesterday for Mother's Day, but she's like,
Yeah.
it's not rejection, it's like redirection, right? But
Yeah,
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 in
yeah.
the moment, it's hard. And I think also there's failing, and then there's identifying as a failure. And then
Yes.
it's kind of like there's disappointments, and then I think that that's more kind of the shame story, like feeling bad, and it kind of creeps over into your identity. You're like, well, I tried that and it didn't work out. And it's like when you kind of study like successful people, they failed a bunch. We usually just see them being successful, whatever, 30 years into
Right.
their story. And it's hard to, and but I think with scripture, like all things work together for good for those that love God. And it's kind of like, yeah, the timeline on that is a little bit, it's usually probably longer than we would want it to be, like
Yeah.
maybe like it might not, like I think I was listening to Tim Keller do a clip on this where he was like, yeah, we usually give God a week.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not enough time. But yeah, I like your I don't know, maybe you can want to talk about some of these principles, but yeah, you were I don't know if there's like an order to this, but yeah,
Yeah. I
so
mean, look, I think
yeah,
that
these yeah,
I'll give you some,
yeah, yeah,
a little bit of a flavor for that, which is,
sure,
you know, think about the notion, of um, how do we, take, I would say, the moments each day which are fleeting, and
right,
how do we find a way to really try to make the most of every day? Oftentimes you ask somebody like, "What did you do?" and people will look back and say, "I don't even remember anything that I did today." You know what I'm saying?
kind of a blur, yeah, yeah,
It's just like a
yeah,
blur. It's just like
right,
another day.
right,
And, one of the principles in the book is called discovering your Elijah moment. And I want to talk
yeah,
about that one for a few moments because
yeah,
I call it like the standing room only phenomenon. You're at a
okay,
funeral and there's somebody who's at the funeral, and the family doesn't know who they are, and the deceased may not even remember who they are. But that person is there because of one moment in time, the individual who passed away did something that made an impact on that individual's life.
hmm,
And I call it the Elijah moment based on a beautiful story. Elijah was a prophet who kind of comes where people need him most.
right,
And a young man goes to a mystic and says to him, I want to see Elijah the prophet. So the
yeah,
mystic says to him, well, there's a widow in the forest and bring some food for her and her family for the Sabbath, for the weekend. So he goes there Friday night, no Elijah. Saturday, no Elijah. Finally, Sunday morning comes and he hasn't seen Elijah. He goes to the mystic and says, you promised me I would see Elijah.
yeah,
He says, take food, go back into the forest. I promise this week you'll see Elijah. So it's Friday afternoon. He goes back deep into the forest and he's within earshot of the home. And he hears a young child crying out to the mother, saying, Mommy, where are we going to get food from for this Sabbath?
hmm,
And the mother turns to the child and says, just like Elijah came last week, Elijah's going to come again. And he realizes that he is the Elijah that this woman is waiting for.
hmm,
And discovering your Elijah moment means
yeah,
God is not asking us to change the world, but every day we have to think about how can we change the world of one person each day. And when a person
yeah,
leads their life with
yeah,
that sense that no encounter is random, and that if somebody enters into my orbit, God designed that moment for me to ensure that that person leaves my orbit feeling better about themselves than when they entered my orbit. And I'll give you an example of this. A woman said to me, I said years ago, tell me about one of your most inspiring moments in life. And she said, well, I was at a supermarket getting out of my car, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw an elderly man getting out of his car. And I noticed that his shoes were untied.
hmm,
And I walked over to him and said, do you mind if I help you tie your shoes?
wow,
She said, I
wow,
bent down and I said, she said, I felt closer to God in that moment than almost ever before in my life.
hmm,
And I said, because at that moment, you are the individual that that person needed most. And the reality is that we have those opportunities like all the time to flood the world with kindness without expectation of anything in return. And when you
right,
do that, you never forget those moments
right, right.
because those are the moments that really make life meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was thinking of the Elijah story. I was like, wait, you're talking about Elisha, right? Is that the other guy? No, that's at the end of the story. But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, but yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I think like to the story of the tying the shoelaces, I think that there's like that scripture I think in First John that's like, if you see your brother in need, but you say you love God, that you don't see, but you
Yeah,
don't help the person you do see. And I mean, I don't think that that's the only place that that principle is there. I think it's the thirsty naked, the parables and like, yeah, this idea of like God's proof of someone needing the proof that God is real most of the time is going to come through other people. Like
a
it
hundred
can,
percent.
right? It can happen, and like an angel comes, and there's a lot of things, so it kind of seems kind of obvious, but I think we maybe forget that it's like, oh shoot, I need to stop and like look someone in the eye when they ask me for money when I'm rushing into 7-Eleven, or
Yeah.
there's like you're saying, it's all these little moments. I think I heard you say that on the podcast I listened to, and but yeah, I think also it's like where do you find the people to because it is a principle in the 12 steps where you get to a point where in your sobriety you serve at like meetings, but you also give back to people. It's part of
Hmm.
like, the program. But I think maybe people struggle with that. Like, who am I supposed to help or who am I supposed to serve? So it sounds like you're saying kind of just be open to those moments.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I mean, one was just really recently, but the other was not too long ago. I was at the Philadelphia train station waiting for a train, and an older gentleman in his mid 70s walks over to me and says, "Would you mind buying me dinner? I need food."
Oh wow,
I
okay.
guess I looked like a generous guy, and
Yeah, yeah.
I said to him,
Nice,
"Would you
nice.
mind, if I'll get you some food from Dunkin' Donuts?" And
Okay,
he said to me, "I prefer the Cajun food that's over there." And I said,
okay.
"Fine, we'll
Spicy
get you the."
chicken.
Yeah, I guess so. I
Yeah,
went over there.
yeah,
I said, "Whatever this guy wants, I'll get the food." And
yeah, yeah,
then
yeah.
he was sitting and he ate his food. And then I said to him, "What's your name?" He said his name is Sam. And I said to him, "God bless you, Sam." And he
Hmm,
turned to me and said, "God has already blessed me. He sent me you."
hmm. Yeah,
And
wow.
that's exactly the point because like in that moment, I was there and I realized that and he did like you're right, God's not just gonna swoop down and give him dinner, but we're the ones to really try to um be God's ambassadors. Mark Twain said the two most important days of your life are the day when you're born
Hmm.
and the day when you understand why.
Yeah, I think I've
And
heard
I
that
knew that
quote.
that was the
Yeah, yeah,
moment
yeah.
that I was there. I was fun. I was talking to a woman in Atlanta recently, a few days ago, and she said, "Rabbi," said, I'm 5'2". I said, "Okay." She says, "You know what that means? Nobody ever asks me to reach up and get something because I'm so short."
Right,
She said,
right.
"But something happened to me at the supermarket recently." She said, "I always go into the supermarket to go in and out as fast as possible so that I can get in and out buy my groceries. But a few days ago, I was in the supermarket and I saw in the aisle there was a woman who was 4'9", an older woman.
Hmm.
And she said to me, 'Would you mind reaching up so you can help me with the groceries?'" And then
Yeah,
as it turns out, she wanted me to follow her around the entire supermarket so I could be the one to get the stuff in the aisle.
making up
And then
for
she
all
said,
those years that she wasn't asked.
yeah, but she said, "I changed my
Yeah,
mind. I
right.
realized that God put me in that aisle so that I could be helpful to somebody else." And I said to her and my community, I said, "I think now, whenever we go to the supermarket, we should have two goals. One is to get our groceries,
Yeah,
and the other is not to leave the supermarket until you help somebody there."
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's simple and profound, and kind of just like, man, if you. So it sounds like, yeah, like what helps you. I'm sure this is in. Well, you said seize meditative moments, but what helps you kind of stay? What I hear you saying is like you're just open, right? You're just like,
Yeah, I
yeah, of
think it's
course you
also,
got stuff to do. You're like at the train station, but like that's how God works. It's like, hey, just go do this thing over here. It's supposed to be like an adventure, right?
yeah.
And yeah,
It is. I think it's also, and this is a little where the seizing meditative moments is, it does take, it takes literally exercising our spiritual muscle so we're intuitive to those moments. And
right, right.
what I also recommend, it's called the 3-minute program. It's
Okay.
very easy. The first minute in the morning is every day is to offer prayer. A prayer basically asking God, to give you the strength, to give you the health, to be kind of his ambassador within the world. For me, the verse that I quote is a verse I think about verse from Isaiah chapter 40, where I pray to God. It says, those who have faith in God, their strength will be renewed.
Hmm.
They will
Yeah.
grow wings like eagles. They will run and not walk and not grow tired or weary. Because when you
Yeah.
invite God into your life, you find renewed strength. The second minute is to write down something that you're grateful for every day. Start a gratitude journal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my daughter actually kind of enlightened me here. She was doing this and she said, don't repeat yourself.
Hmm.
It's easy to say the same thing, but if you don't repeat yourself, it forces us to find new things. And she said, when I learned about this, she was up to almost 800 of them in her gratitude journal.
Wow.
And she said to me, every night before I go to sleep, I read 50 of them. How can I not be grateful for the life that God has given me? And
Wow.
then
Yeah.
the third minute is to send a text, a phone call, just to give somebody a little bit of strength, to offer a prayer, put out some light into the world. And what I encourage people to do is, let's say, beginning of the week on Sunday, is take 15 minutes and just think about the people in your life who maybe did something for you years ago and helped you get to where you are. Think
Hmm.
about somebody who's going through a challenging time. Think about somebody who needs maybe just an extra word of kindness and just free flow all those names. And then every day, reach out to one of those people. And the reason why I share this strategy is because, of course, we have to be open when we're in a supermarket or we're
Right.
in an Uber, but being a spiritually great person also takes planning. In other words, you have to be very intentional about it.
Right.
Like every
Right.
day, I want to make sure that I'm doing something that's worthy of future memory. So that's where the meditative moments comes in because sometimes we're so busy, we don't think about these things. But we have to kind of stop a little bit, think about what's truly important. What do I want to accomplish today? Not just check off my list.
Right.
That's easy to do. But
Right.
what do I want to do today that is worthy of future memory in my life?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, lots of good stuff there. Like 800 things. I
You got to
know when I,
start somewhere. You
yeah,
got to
I,
start with one. Yeah.
yeah, when I've been in hard depressive episodes, that was something my sister had told me to do. And she's just like, make a gratitude list. And it's hard to do when you're in a real bad place. But that, I mean, saying it before you go to bed, I mean, that is so valuable for the soul more than like
Yeah.
so many other things we probably do when we're winding down. So when you meditate, obviously you just said 3 minutes, so that's doesn't sound too overwhelming for people.
No,
But I
it's
think no, I think that's good though. But I think when you meditate, like, because I feel like when people hear that, they're like, oh, I don't have time for that, or and they feel like maybe it needs to be long. Like, how do you kind of incorporate that into your is it short meditations or what do you mean when you meditate? Like just
what I would say is, it's time really when I turn off the outside world and listen to my inner world.
right,
Meditation doesn't have to be like I'm sitting there like doing yoga or even prayer.
right,
Walking is meditative. Put your phone, let your mind wander a little bit. Think about like, you know,
right.
what you're grateful for. Think about, what really matters in your life. And those are moments to reorient. I mean, I'll get, an example that I like to use is that there was a story of a fellow who, young kid, who was in a big farmhouse, and the farmer lost his watch in the barn. And everybody was running around the barn trying to find the watch, and nobody could find it. And they all went into the main house, and again, they thought the barn, they thought the watch was lost. But about 15 minutes later, a young boy comes in and says, I found the watch. I found the watch.
Hmm,
And they said,
hmm,
how'd you find the watch amidst, all this hay and everything in the barn? He said, well, look, all I did was I put my ear to the ground and I heard the watch ticking.
hmm,
When everybody is running around, when we're busy, we're on our phones, we're answering emails, we have no time to think. But when we create a quiet in our life, that's when we begin to hear the ticking of our soul. That's when we begin to think about like,
hmm,
who am I? What do I want to be? Who are the relationships that I really want to invest in? What's
hmm,
really important? And one of the exercises that I have in the book, and I started something called the Legacy Academy, where I work with people intentionally through this process, is I'll ask people, what are the 5 words you want to be remembered by?
hmm.
And somebody said to me, and you could say answering that question is a meditative experience because the person said,
Right.
I want to be remembered as a father, as a friend, as a son. And then the person said, you know what? I have a sister. and I forgot to write down that I want to be remembered as a brother.
Hmm.
It must mean that I need to nurture relationships with my siblings more.
Yeah.
Now, had he not gone through that meditative exercise of what his 5 words were, he wouldn't have thought about maybe he is missing the boat a little bit in
Right.
terms of investing in the relationship with his sisters. So that's what I'm talking about. It's not like just
Yeah.
sitting on top of a mountain and just, it's like,
Right. Right. Yeah, that is what a
it's
lot of people
self-reflection.
think.
It's a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, look, the distraction thing, I think is, I mean, I think we've always been prone to distractions, but especially in the last now 20 some years with phones, right? Like I was, I'm 39. I'm like, I graduated high school, I had like a flip phone, but it's like a lot has changed. So it's like I think if we didn't have technology, we still would probably be distracted, but the technology thing seems to really can get the best of us sometimes in
It's
terms of
true.
what. Yeah, and I think the thing too, when you say like 5 words, I think sometimes it's like maybe we misunderstand. Like we think of success as the things that we do like in like a material way,
Yeah.
whereas like scripture is saying like without love you have no reward or you have nothing. So it's not that we don't just do nothing because obviously we do. It sounds like it's like things that are identities, right? Like and love and relationships. That's really all that
Yeah.
matters. Like the way you love your. So yeah, do you think that part of what holds people back from that is like unforgiveness or bitterness, right? Because that seems to be the biggest relational barrier to loving people is like holding on to resentments, I mean that's a hard one.
Well, I think that, our role, regardless of our faith,
Yeah.
is to emulate God. It's just to walk in the ways of God.
Yeah.
And every morning, God has a choice. Do I focus, do I dig for the dirt in another human being or do I mine for the gold?
Hmm.
There are a lot of things that each one of us does that would tick God off. But God says, I'm going to be graceful. I'm going to give you another chance.
Hmm.
I know you want to be a better person, and I'm going to find the good in you, and I'm going to try to fuel that with new hope for a new day. So I always remind people, which is don't look at others the way you want God to look at you. Like we always want God's grace. So
Right.
therefore, if we want God's grace, we have to be graceful with others and be willing. Again, I'm not saying that if somebody is not remorseful, I don't have to have that person walk over me. Like, I don't say, "Hey, you're forgiven." And they don't even recognize what they did wrong. But if many relationships, people have said, "I'm sorry for what I did. I really am. I didn't mean it, and I'm going to be better." And sometimes people hold that and say, "No, that's it. You didn't invite me to that event. I'm never talking to you again."
Right. Right.
And I've seen that
Hmm.
as a rabbi sometimes. Many times people may not have talked to each other, and you ask them why, they say, I don't even remember anymore. And that's tragic.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
part of um, the challenge that we all have, but again, I think that's where faith comes in. That's where we have to be graceful with others, is helping others. Um, Again, recognize that everyone makes mistakes and we need to give people new opportunities to mend relationships. That's what God does with us, and we need to try to help, and we need to do that with other people as well.
Right. Yeah, that's good, man. That's a I know you got so much here. I know our conversation's probably kind of coming to an end, but real quick, what does the last one mean? Discover your renewable energy. I like that. Maybe we can end
Yeah,
on
so
that.
what I would say there is that, I don't believe in the notion of retirement. We don't retire. We
Right.
don't retire from life. We may retire from our jobs. And one of the
Right.
keys to think about in life is don't confuse your mission with your purpose.
Hmm.
Our purpose in this world is to take the divine potential that God has given us at any moment, at any time, and grow and emit that light and just try to again make the world a place where there's a little more heaven on earth. But I do that in different ways. When my kids are young, I do that as a father. When later on, I may do that as a friend. I may do that as a grandfather. Athletes have a big challenge with this because, they're lauded for being a basketball player, let's say, but that's not who they are. That's what they do.
Right. Right.
And being mindful that um, God gives us renewable energy when we recognize that we have renewable purpose in this world and
Right.
not getting stuck in the mission. You know what? I did lose this job, but as you said before, Zig Ziglar said this: failure is an event; it's not a person.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
may
That's a
not
big
be in
one.
this job anymore, but that doesn't mean that I still don't have a life purpose. And when we recognize that and we know that God is always walking with us, then we realize that God is infusing us with new energy and new potential in a whole new way. And it puts a bounce in our step and gives us renewable energy. We
Yeah.
don't get tired because God says, you know what? I'm going to invest in you. You have so much to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can see people saying, man, all I feel is worn out and tired, and I think of like his yoke is easy, his burden's light. And I think it's a process for sure. But yeah, well, that's probably a good place to kind of just wrap up. I really appreciate your time. I know you have some books, and what's the best way
I
for
do.
people to get a hold of you and find
Yeah,
your
so
stuff?
basically, a couple things. You can
Yeah.
go on my website, rabbidanielcohen.com.
Okay.
And you can also, I have a book called What Will They Say About You When You're Gone? Creating a Life of Legacy, a new fiction book called The Secret of the Light,
Oh, cool.
which is about how people kind of find faith in difficult times. And I started something called the Legacy Academy, which is
Okay.
an online program to help people tap into the highest frequency of living. And you can reach me via my website.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll put all the information in the notes. Rabbi, I appreciate your time and thanks for joining me on Mental Health Month. And I really, really
Thank you.
appreciate it. And I'll be in touch with your people when this gets. I'll get this published
Perfect.
soon.
God
So,
bless you, my friend.
all right. Thank you so much. God
Thank
bless you
you.
too. Thanks for your time. All right. Have a good rest of your night. Okay.
You too. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.